All right, welcome to the afternoon elective session. You're interested in earth science, and so I'd love to explain to you 37-year experience with Mount St. Helens since 1980, and make this experience something that you can take with you to think about the earth in a different way. On May 18th, 1980, a catastrophic event occurred that not only shocked the world because of its explosive power, but it challenged the way we think about the earth. That event was the eruption of Mount St. Helens there in Washington State, Sunday, May 18, 1980. It is the geologic event of the century. It was a learning experience about catastrophic process that helps us understand how the earth was formed. I believe that the eruption of Mount St. Helens is the geologic event of the 20th century. And now as we're looking back on the 20th century and ask what was going on geologically to challenge the kind of the stagnant way of thinking of the 20th century, I believe that Mount St. Helens is that event. Come with me by way of the the PowerPoint projector and think about what the volcano did, what it was like there at the volcano as it erupted. Think about what the volcano did in very short order, almost a Ripley's Believe It or Not of a geologic process. Then apply what you have seen at Mount St. Helens to other geologic features of the earth, like Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, that kind of thing. And then finally, what does the volcano say to you and me personally about ourselves? And think about the broader implications of the Mount St. Helens experience. There it is, the volcano profile before. There's the profile after. It lost 1,300 feet of summit elevation on the morning of May 18. Mount St. Helens, come, behold the works of the Lord, what desolations he has made in the earth. Psalm 46, verse 8. When I read that verse, I said, hey, I'm getting my boots on, and I'm going out there and going to go see what happened at Mount St. Helens. I was a student at University of Washington in Seattle 4 years. Mount St. Helens was my favorite volcano before the eruption. Then there was the eruption, and you'll see why I wanted to go there. There's the image before the eruption. There's the lake north of the volcano, Spirit Lake, and the virgin forest all around. It was a classic volcano. After the eruption, it lost 1,300 feet of summit elevation on the morning of May 18th as a Richter magnitude 5.1 earthquake shook the summit, and the summit was dislodged. It slid down into Spirit Lake Basin, 1/4 of the landslide material, made a giant water wave on the lake. The lake sloshed back in this new basin with a 220-foot high debris dam at the corner right here. So the lake is now occupying a new volume of space. Then there's simultaneously 3/8 of a cubic mile of landslide debris that was deposited down here in this canyon, the upper North Fork of the Toutle River drainage. And that blocked the main drainage. And even over top this ridge, you can see the hummocky landslide material on top of Johnston Ridge. And all of that landslide debris, which was the summit of the volcano, that was holding down the pressure inside the volcano. 1,300 feet of summit rock was holding down the pressure. As a landslide occurred and that debris avalanche of that material left, what happened? The pressure inside the volcano was released, and equivalent of a 20 million ton TNT blast steam explosion occurred. And that blew out not vertical, but horizontal over the landscape, leveled 150 square miles of forest in 6 to 10 minutes. And then lots of other things happened. There was pyroclastic flows from the volcano during the early afternoon, and then airfall debris and mud flows. So lots of things were going on at the volcano. So it's a cool thing. There's the image before the eruption, and from the northeast looking southwest, you see the summit crater. Between March 1980 and May 1980, during that 90-day period, there was a lot of steaming in the summit crater, but it had this kind of profile. The north part of the mountain right here swelled during the 90-day period between middle of March, middle of May. It had swollen about 450 feet. So I'm going to show you the eruption profile from the northeast looking southwest. Remember, I was talking about the 450-foot bulge on the north slope of the volcano. So there's a 450-foot bulge on the north side of the volcano. That was the obvious thing that was going on. And geologists had measured that bulge and were alarmed at what was going on. What was happening? Magma was being injected into the north slope of the volcano, underground, under that pressure. It was swelling up like a balloon. 3 to 5 feet a day of swelling was occurring on the north slope of the volcano. So that was obviously the most obvious thing that was going on. Okay, here shows a sequence of the event. And there it is, morning of May 18. You can see the profile, I believe, if this works. Nope, it didn't. Okay. Okay. Well, that it didn't play that video. What it was going to show you is the landslide occurring. The landslide broke loose from that angle and was photographed in 3 different rotational slumps. The 1,300 feet of summit and north slope slid away. Here you see it from Johnston Ridge to from the northeast looking southwest. Northwest looking southeast, and you're seeing the summit profile. Now look at that right there, that little shoulder ridge, and then look at this right here. Okay, I'm going to show you the next image. Let's see what that says. You see that? Okay, before and after. There's the after shot. Before, right there, and look at the foreground, how obviously the summit left, and look at the foreground right here, exactly the same place before and after the eruption. After. That slope is defoliated. That landscape down below is a couple hundred feet higher, and of course the summit has slid away. Before, after. Amazing geologic change. Okay, let's see if it'll play this video. I have a section, the first 50 seconds. And the first 50 seconds of the eruption is when the rotational slump is occurring, and then the steam explosion. Hopefully it'll play. Let's see what happens here. It didn't play. Let's see if it does this. Okay, no. Okay. It's a simulation. This is not good that have such a good educational experience of a Hollywood video being made very well done, and I can't show it to media people. But anyway, here is there's what it looks like after. But anyway, the explosion sequence, there's a magnitude 5.1 earthquake on the summit as you're looking from the northwest to the southeast. And the Richter magnitude 5 earthquake shakes the summit, and the summit starts to fall as rocks. And as the rocks fall, it is a rock fall. There are bouncing rocks and friction. Then what happens is the rocks that are falling go into flow. In other words, they start becoming a whole stream of rocks. And as the stream of rocks flows out of there, it makes this avalanche, I guess you would call it, debris avalanche. And it looks like a snow avalanche. That's probably what it looked like as the rocks were falling off the summit. And this debris avalanche falls off the summit down about at the base of the mountain, and then 15 or 20 seconds after the rocks are flowing, then the explosion occurs, and the steam explosion. Liquid hot water, 900 degrees centigrade, flashes to steam in the magma at depth. And when that happens, it causes this supersonic blast out a nozzle to the north. It did not vent up into the atmosphere like everybody thought a volcano should. It blasted out horizontally over the landscape because there was no summit sitting here. On the north side. So it blew out over the landscape with a northward directed steam blast equivalent to 20 million tons of TNT blast energy. It blasted out over the landscape. And then as it blasted out over the landscape, of course, it knocked down and toasted the trees. Simultaneously, the rock slide debris, debris avalanche is in the lake, making this giant water wave up to 860 feet high. As the water sloshed up onto the north shore of the lake, it removed the trees and then sloshed back into the lake. As it sloshed back into the lake, it took the logs and there were trees on the slope, brought them back into the lake, and 1 million logs floated there in the afternoon of May 18th on this new lake, with a new landslide debris dam at the corner, occupying a new volume of space 225 feet or so above the pre-eruption level. So the lake was radically altered. And then, of course, the whole valley was impacted, and even over top the ridge. And then hot Plinian eruption occurred, and that's when the magma in the volcano, in the neck of the volcano, came up, and it blasted vertically and made this beautiful column that 12 miles up, that kind of thing, and then it collapsed occasionally and made these pyroclastic flows. Pyroclastic flows are these glowing avalanches of hot ash that were spread over the landscape. And because the north part of the crater was formed, the horseshoe-shaped crater, the pyroclastic flows came down over the landslide debris and made this avalanche area covered with the glowing, very hot flows. And those pyroclastic flows were intermittent. And then in between that, there were lots of other things happening, especially the melted ice in the crater of the volcano made mud flows. And on 6 major rivers downstream, we had very severe mud flows. The mud flow damage from Mount St. Helens was more severe than any of the other damage. Mud flow caused more damage 50 miles away, mud flows swept down valleys and floodplains and destroyed farms. Whereas in the 150 square mile area, it was largely national forest, and only 57 people died as a result of the eruption, but the area of the mud flows was considerable. Bridges, dozens of bridges were washed away on 6 major rivers. Then it erupted violently. It erupted violently for 9 hours, and it built this giant plume Plinian eruption column, and that's what we remember in the media. Volcano in full eruption. That day, on May 18, 1980, the total energy output of the volcano was something like 440 million tons of TNT blast energy. 20 million tons in the initial explosion, and over the 9-hour eruption, about 440 million tons of TNT blast energy. That's equivalent to 33,000 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs, and since there's 33,000 seconds in 9 hours, that's an atomic bomb a second. That's the volcano output, energy output. And that's a small volcano from the standpoint of human experience in history. There have been bigger, much bigger volcanic eruptions. Like Yellowstone. Yellowstone has this, Yellowstone has this circular elliptical depression right here. Okay, and it's like 45 kilometers by 20 kilometers, this elliptical depression, and that is the Yellowstone caldera. And if you look around, you can see the explosion products from that. It's something like 2,000 times Mount St. Helens, 2,000 times the explosion products of Mount St. Helens. Look at the area of that collapsed volcano, not just a horseshoe-shaped crater, it's a caldera. That is a structure that formed from that eviscerated volcano that collapsed back into the hole. That's the story at Yellowstone. So Yellowstone has 2,000 times the explosion power of Mount St. Helens. That's a big volcanic explosion. And there are even bigger ones than that, like I've talked about, linear fissure array eruptions associated with the Sierra Madre Occidental in Mexico. A whole mountain range essentially is a gigantic volcanic pile caused by pull apart of plates. And let's see, Independence Dike Swarm in Southern California is largely the feeder dikes for the Morrison Formation out in Utah and Colorado. There are dime-size pumice fragments in southern Utah that came from volcanoes in California. Ballistic trajectory, 600 kilometers distance. Those are big volcanic eruptions. A safe distance to watch one of those would be a higher orbit of the space shuttle, something like that. Okay, that's the type of volcano that we're dealing with. There are super volcanoes. Mount St. Helens just a normal nozzle volcano. Nozzle volcanoes. Then there's elliptical ring fissure volcanoes like Yellowstone. And then there's this new kind of super volcano we call linear fissure array. Okay, mud flow, and of course it's not going to play my mud flow image. Okay, all right. Anyway, the mud flows were very energetic events, and I have some good mud flow imagery to show you. But what we learned at Mount St. Helens about mud flows is considerable. We learned how fast they move. On the slopes of Mount St. Helens, there was melted snow, and from the summit crater, within the crater is about 15 feet of snow and ice in the crater. All that was coming down out of the volcano, and moving at 90 miles per hour on the slopes of the volcano, slowing down as it got down but it went all the way down to the Columbia River, and did considerable damage. The mud flow damage was the greatest. Okay, mud flows on 6 major rivers downstream, dozens of bridges washed away, logging camps overcome by mud. It was just a real mess. But the learning experience from the mud flows, to me, was how mud flow deposits look like some things that I see in the geologic record. Maybe we can take a talk about that. But when I talk about flood sedimentation in later, I think it's Wednesday, when we talk about that, I will come back to Mount St. Helens. Stratification was formed rapidly at Mount St. Helens. On the southwestern corner of Spirit Lake, right in this area, there's a landslide debris dam overtopped by all kinds of pyroclastic flow deposits and mud flow deposits and airfall debris. 600 feet of strata formed there since 1980. 600 feet formed. And so when Thomas Purefoy said, Steve, I'd like to take you out somewhere and let's study the and talk about his Genesis history, I thought, well, I'll take him out there. And then we went out there and we videoed a whole sequence, and then the lights started coming on. You know, Del Tackett loved the place, and he was talking, I used to ride with my dad in country like this, you know, and then that's how the whole start of the video sequence began, and I was scooped by Del and his experience. But it made the start of the documentary, didn't it? Did you like that? Yes. the way it went? Yeah, and so it's a plum right for picking, and we didn't have it scripted. We made it up as we went along, you know, that kind of thing, which is kind of cool. And that's, for me, that's probably what made the documentary good, is that we weren't looking at a teleprompter in an office with a bunch of books behind us reading. We were out there and, you know, doing what we love doing and talking about science. Anyway, 600 feet of deposits right there. Every layer has a date. Okay, we have photographs in between eruptions and that type of thing. So there's a pyroclastic flow coming off the northern slope of Mount St. Helens. Pyroclastic flows kill more geologists than any other natural disaster. Okay, volcanologists fear these things because they're so unexpected and they move so fast. But it's a ground-hugging slurry of volcanic ash and steam that moves at 100 miles per hour. The pyroclastic flows freeze, and they freeze rather abruptly, and they form the pyroclastic flow deposits. You can kind of imagine what that's like. It's a granular kind of slurry, and then looking at them in cross-section is interesting. Right there is a pyroclastic flow deposit from June 12th, 1980. Here it is, the upper part of that cliff area, one cliff area. There's the airfall debris from the afternoon of May 18, 1980. Then we have photographs of this area without that. And then June 12th came in 25 feet in thickness, and it was deposited, we think, in 3-hour period of time. There's radar imagery of the summit of Mount St. Helens from Portland, showing this big plume of volcanic ash that was over the summit, and that collapsed. And within 3 hours, this was formed from about 9 p.m. to midnight, June 12, 1980. And as it collapsed, a series of these flows came out of the crater and made that. Now, I had thought that a pyroclastic catastrophe would make a homogenized deposit. You know, mix everything up and you just throw it out over the surface, and it would be kind of a massive deposit. Instead, it's layered, and it has this incredible layering to it, And that is the kind of the take home from looking at a pyroclastic flow. No geologist wants to see that, of course, at close experience, but that's the, there's tremendous organization and sorting ability. The closer you get to the June 12th deposit, the more layered it becomes. Here's the upper half of it. On top of that, by the way, was the mudflow deposit. Okay, and here's the even thin lamination was formed in a hurricane. Can you believe that? Something moving at 100 miles per hour would deposit plain beds like that? It's believable. You can see it right in front of you. And so granular slurries segregate particles into layers, and that's what we saw very vividly illustrated at Mount St. Helens. Now, if those layers were at the edge of a stream, you know what I might assume? Each layer represents coarse and fine from individual wet years and dry years, between floods and non-floods, that kind of thing. And so I might imagine long periods of time. In the Tapete sandstone overlaying the great unconformity in Grand Canyon, the 350 feet thickness of Tapete sandstone has many of the sedimentary structures that I saw at Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens made these sedimentary structures like cross-bedding, flat lamination very rapidly, and that type of feature is in the Tapete sandstone. And I had been accustomed to thinking in terms of the Tapete sandstone as being formed over tens of millions of years. That was the university experience. That was suggested to me, and so yeah, that kind of layering can be formed rapidly. Erosion features formed rapidly. It's up near the base of the volcano. There is a canyon cut through solid rock. There's a 500-year-old lava flow on the north slope of the volcano. There's an ancient volcanic ash layer and a volcanic debris flow deposit underneath. All that was gouged out after the summer of 1980. Over 100 feet deep, and there's a small stream flowing through that canyon now. Do you think that canyon was formed one sand grain at a time, eroded away slowly? Well, we have the eyewitness reports, and there was no canyon there, and then the canyon rapidly appeared after the summer of 1980. So hard rock erosion can occur at volcanoes. Here's an ancient lava flow, ancient volcanic landslide deposit, ancient volcanic ash layer. That's up to 600 feet deep in a side canyon near the north side of the volcano. All that formed after the summer of 1980. And so canyon formation and rock erosion, very apparent. Okay, March 19th, 1982, there was a large mass of ice in the summit area, and behind the lava dome there was a little lake, a lake of melted water, and lots of snow in the crater. That eruption on March 19th, 1982, melted the snow and ice and broke that water that was in the lake, and it came down as a mud flow. Most of the mud flow went down to the west, down the North Fork of the Toutle River. A little bit of it went into Spirit Lake. And there you see this mud flow. The mud flow cut right through here, and I'll show you this next image of that terrain looking from a different angle. There's the volcano up there. The mud came down right through here, came down through this plain right here, breached right through here, and made this whole new direct line drainage. Since then, that canyon has been plugged by sediment, and the new river system is diverted over here to this way. And here we have 140-foot high cliffs. And we have this miniature Grand Canyon sitting there. This photograph shows from the air the breach. 5 different drainages come together here, and in here is where the landslide debris was very thick. This area was overtopped by mud on March 19, 1982. The mud overtopped this debris dam, then it notched back a spillway, and it cut back and formed a waterfall, a retreating waterfall, and it cut back up into this terrain. And it made this very elaborate canyon system. Here you are in the ground looking over. You see the gully-headed side canyon. There's a cup-shaped side canyon right there. And then you see the flatland kind of high plateau north and the plateau south. And then you see the main canyon snaking through. It didn't curve straight through. It has a snaky path. And there's the over 100-foot tall cliffs out there. And so you're looking at the new landscape from Mount St. Helens. Here's that detail of that small stream flowing through that big wide canyon. There you see June 12th deposit, mud flow of March 19th, 1982. Here's that right canyon. This formed over a period of about 15 months by diverted water from the other drainages. Here you see this small stream. Do you think that this 140-foot tall cliff was eroded one sand grain at a time by this small creek? It might appear that way, but we have the eyewitness reports of photo documentation that all this happened rapidly over here in a period of months. Man, right there for scale, there's a small stream near vertical cliff. That volcanic ash is standing up very steeply because it's been cemented, and it's hardened. And so anyway, there's the river. So appearances are deceiving. We might imagine thousands or even millions of years for canyons. And Grand Canyon is the natural application when we're looking at that little Grand Canyon at Mount St. Helens. It is a miniature Grand Canyon, 1/40th scale of Grand Canyon. Mount St. Helens is 1/40th scale. So here we see it. There you have this upwarp dome called the Kaibab upwarp, and you have the canyon eroded through the lip of that dome or ridge structure. And there's evidence of a lake up here, so there probably was overtopping of water, and water drained through this channel, just like at Mount St. Helens. So that's a good way of thinking about Mount St. Helens. Okay. And Mount St. Helens helps us understand canyon erosion generally, and it gives us a good lesson in that. And then logs and log deposits at Mount St. Helens. Let's go to Spirit Lake. I was sitting down next to the lake eating my lunch when what should float in but a bunch of sticks. Okay, and I saw these 4 sticks floating there, and I noticed that they blew in and they were standing vertical and they grounded in the shallow water area. You see what's going on there? And these 4 sticks were upright floaters that grounded in the shallow water area, and I was thinking about these sticks eating my lunch when I thought about the logs in Spirit Lake. 1 million logs floated the day after May 18 on Spirit Lake, and the 1 million logs, could they be like the sticks and float in upright position and get grounded, like this observation indicated? So here's what I imagined. Imagine, 1 million logs in the lake. Okay, the root end of the log could be mired down by roots, maybe even rocks, but it didn't have to be. But water could filter into or flow into the log, make the root end of the log heavier, and it could float and be an upright floating log, I thought to myself. Just like the sticks, the logs could do the same thing. Then the logs could fall to the bottom, and because the upper part of the log is floatable and a whole log is heavier in water and sinks, it could still stand in upright position on the bottom of the lake. You see what I was imagining as I was thinking about upright floating logs on the lake? And then I thought to myself, well, sedimentation is occurring rapidly in the lake as the logs could float upright and fall to the bottom, so the logs could have their root ends buried at different strata layer levels in the bottom of the lake. You see what I was imagining there? And then some logs could fall over and get buried, be a buried prone log, but they could be upright, floated and buried logs. You see what I was thinking? It was kind of an outrageous thought, I would agree, okay, but it was worth thinking about. That would appear, what? To be multiple forest levels otherwise. You could imagine a forest growing at this level. That forest was later destroyed and buried, and then a second forest grew, and a third forest. You can imagine multiple forests with upright logs with the root ends and buried at different levels. That idea was a common way of thinking. Take a look at the surface of the lake. You can see these upright floaters out there amongst the logs in the lake. Large amounts of Douglas fir, also silver fir, noble fir, cedar trees, very abundant. Here you see where one area of the lake where the upright floating logs had become grounded, and natural man-made lowering of the level of the lake, man-made lowering of the level of the lake has slightly inclined these logs. That's interesting. So how would we verify that the logs were floating upright and getting buried on the bottom of the lake? Side scan sonar is a technique you could use. So we got the sonar device in the boat, and there's the automobile batteries, and there's the sonar towfish. You lower the towfish over the side of the boat, and you get the reflection off the bottom of the lake. And then the paper record comes off of the recorder. Here's the paper record coming off the recorder, and you can see that we're looking from the towfish position right here off to the side of the boat at about 50 yards or so over the bottom of the lake. And here's the 50 feet below the bottom of the below the towfish is the bottom of the lake, and you see the sonar reflection generally from the bottom of the lake. There's open water. Notice this. There's a sonar reflector right here standing off the bottom of the lake, and there's the sonar shadow behind it. Could that be an upright log standing there? You see how we're interpreting that? Here's a diagonally inclined reflector with a diagonally inclined log a little bit behind it. See that? Here's an enormous sonar reflector standing off the bottom of the lake, and there's the sonar shadow behind it. It even looks like a giant Douglas fir tree just landed there, even without flaring root mass. Do you see the image? When we did the sonar survey of Spirit Lake, we estimated something like 10,000 upright objects standing there on the bottom of the lake. What would Spirit Lake look like if you drained it? It would look like a forest of logs down there on the bottom. But those logs didn't grow there. They were replanted. They were replanted there. And so that's the interesting implications of the sonar study. How would we verify the sonar is giving us the correct impression of the bottom of the lake? We did scientific dives. There I am. There's my diving buddy, and we're getting ready to do what hardly anybody's ever done before. Go diving under floating logs in this very murky water to see what's on the bottom of the lake. Yeah. How many? Well, obviously, it's definitely a moment to get a photo of Mount St. Helens in the background. How many times do divers get photographed with an active volcano back there? In fact, one volcanic eruption occurred while we were in the lake. Diving. There's the steaming lava dome. There I am, there's my diving buddy, and there's an upright floated and deposited log. So we were going down there to study that and see what that was like. Underneath the log mat, looking up with my camera, you can see the floating log, prone floating logs on the surface of the lake. Looking out obliquely, you can see this floating log hanging down from the log mat. Two more upright floaters hanging down over there. So from the top of the log mat, you can't see them, but from underneath, they're very obvious. And diving under the floating log mat wasn't that hard. You could always find a space in between logs if you needed to surface. So that's the normal experience there. But a very interesting environment. Here you see an upright log solidly embedded in the bottom of the lake, another log over there embedded in the bottom of the lake, a base of a trunk of a tree right here. And so right where the sonar said they would be, we found these upright floating and deposited logs, floated and deposited logs. One log had recently landed. It could be easily tipped and swayed. Other logs were solidly embedded, maybe 3 feet of burial around them. So that proves that the logs fall out at different times with the root ends buried at different strata layers in the bottom of the lake, having appearance of being what? Multiple forests. All of that has been redeposited there rapidly. There's the roots, base of a trunk of a tree, big 10-foot diameter Douglas fir tree that landed in one of our study areas, and there you see about 3 or 4 feet from the base of the trunk of the tree, the roots terminate abruptly. This one had roots on it, weighting it down, helped it have a pedestal to land on. There's a sign at Yellowstone National Park. The sign, here's what it said in northeastern Yellowstone. It's a place called Specimen Ridge. Across the valleys rise the slopes of Specimen Ridge, but the forest you see there today is only the latest chapter in a remarkable story. Buried within the volcanic rocks that compose the mountain are 27 distinct layers of fossil forest that flourished 50 million years ago. And the right side of the sign says many stumps still stand upright in the same sites where they grew millions of years ago. And it kind of comes oozing out of the sign, all the millions of years, and there you see the Specimen Ridge layers. In the volcanic strata, that's where we find these very beautifully preserved agatized trees standing upright. And look at that. There's an agatized stump of a tree. There's another agatized stump. And then you see the modern forest in the background. What more normal, natural way to say, there's the modern forest growing there today. There's the ancient forest, or what? Series of forests that grew millions of years ago. 27 distinct layers with upright petrified logs in them. We were able to dig out the roots of a few of these stumps. The roots terminate abruptly. They're not embedded in soil. There is a correlating tree ring sequence from logs with the root ends buried at different strata layer levels, proving that logs with roots at different levels grew at the same time, arguing against the interpretation of that sign. In about 1987, I went to the chief interpreter at Yellowstone, and I said, "Is that sign still there?" And the ranger lady said, "Yes, the sign there, but I can't find two geologists that agree on that sign." And then I said, "Well, are you interested in why that sign has become so controversial? It might be what's going on at Mount St. Helens. You know, the logs are being replanted in the bottom of the lake." And sure enough, that sign left. It was gone. And no sign replaced it. They just pulled it out, and it was retired. So national parks and can be impacted very easily by just people asking questions and that type of thing. So anyway, Mount St. Helens provides an understanding of other geologic features, and it seems like Yellowstone is a good example. Peat deposits of Spirit Lake. Now, there was a large amount of logs floating in Spirit Lake. Could that have anything to do with coal formation? Here is a block of coal, Pennsylvania coal, and we're looking at the coal, and I've been fascinated by the layer structures, you know, those glassy bands that run through the satiny color coal beds, and that's the general laminated appearance of coal. Coal, it was told to me and taught to me, formed in large freshwater swamps. You know, the antiseptic waters of the swamp prevented complete bacterial decay, and the buildup of a thick spongy layer of peat occurred, and then it was later buried by mud and sand, and that compacted the peat and made it into coal. Coal formed in large freshwater swamps. It takes about 1,000 years to form the plant material that later gets squeezed together to form an inch of coal, something like that. That was the typical way of thinking. Thick coal bed, you know, some coal beds are up to 8 feet thick. Coal beds must represent many, many thousands of years, tens of thousands of years to form. That's the idea of the peat swamp explanation for the origin of coal. Take a look at a drained swamp deposit along the coast of Nova Scotia. Coastal erosion has drained the swamp, and you see the thick layer of peat that is built up there, and you see it resting on the non-peat material. But anyway, there you see the coffee grounds to mashed potatoes kind of texture with large, looks like branches hanging out. What are those things that are hanging out? What are those? Roots. Modern swamp peats are intensely root penetrated and create this homogeneous coffee grounds to mashed potatoes macerated material. And that's the swamp peat that we know about. Well, one day I was taking a bath thinking about the root penetrated nature of modern peats and their kind of coffee grounds to mashed potatoes texture. And I was thinking about, logs floating in an ocean. Okay, and this was day before Christmas, 1978. I sketched this diagram. Okay, the floating mat model for the origin of coal. And I imagined logs floating in a large log mat, and that log mat was floating in an ocean, and underneath it, in open water, there was a peat layer that was accumulated, not by plants growing on a surface like a swamp, but underneath a floating log mat. And I like this explanation for a coal bed I was studying in Kentucky. I did my PhD dissertation on a coal bed in Kentucky, western Kentucky, near Central City, Muhlenberg County, Kentucky. It's called the Kentucky number 12 coal. I did my PhD dissertation on the coal bed in Kentucky, and the professor said, you can't turn in a thesis disproving the swamp explanation for the origin of coal. You just can't do that because we don't turn in dissertations disproving theories. We turn in dissertations illustrating theories, not disproving theories. And so I sketched the floating log mat model for the origin of coal. In July of 1979, I defended my PhD dissertation on the floating mat model for the origin of coal bed in Kentucky. And then what happened 10 months later? Mount St. Helens exploded, made Spirit Lake into a gigantic bathtub covered with logs. And so that's why I really had to go diving in Spirit Lake. It made the floating mat situation. There you see Mount St. Helens after the eruption. When I saw that, I knew I had to go diving in there, okay? And anyway, there's a huge number of logs floating on the lake. Notice something about the logs on the lake? You see what? Bark has been removed. Where did it go? Those are, there it is on the bottom of the lake. Large sheets of tree bark sitting in a peat deposit up to 3 feet thick. Now, if you could bury and compact and squeeze that, those sheets of tree bark would have the very beautiful glassy band structure that you see in coal beds, modern coal beds. Are you familiar with the layered glassy bands in the prominent coal layers? As you look at it, that's one of the key thoughts I was trying to explain. Anyway, Mount St. Helens may have provided a first step for the formation of a coal bed. Do you see what I'm thinking about there? Life flourished in the blast zone after the eruption. Here you see sterile volcanic ash, and what? It is sprouting what? The forest fire recovery plants like fireweed, pearly everlasting. There they are growing there on the slopes. And seedling conifers were bent over, buried in snow on May 18 as the steam blast went over the top of them. And then what happened? The seeds sprouted right on that surface, and the seedlings that are already there started growing, and because the rest of the forest was decimated, and they grew back, and now there's 25-foot high conifers growing on that slope, on those slopes there. So that's amazing recovery. We were seeing, as we were out there in the blast zone, we were seeing biologists walking around there, and they were kind of in a daze because they were thinking, oh, it's going to be 400 years before the ecosystem comes back. And, and then they were watching all of these plants, lupins fixing nitrogen, creating these kind of habitats for other organisms. And they were watching the pocket gophers churn up the seeds from underneath the volcanic ash to the surface. And they were single-handedly bringing and reseeding the blast zone. And then, of course, all the invader animals and the elk and things were in there, and grass is growing, and it was amazing. That's just 5 years after. Here's the plants growing on what used to be sky. Okay, this was sky, now it's growing plants. Yeah, and the elk are back in the blast zone. Okay, the original concern was, how are the elk going to survive in the blast zone? Because they have that thick hide, and they're going to overheat in the sun in the summer. They're just going to be disadvantaged, and they're going to be in heat stress, heat stroke, that kind of thing. Well, it turns out that they lay down in wet soil and do this cooling behavior, and they survive very nicely in the blast zone. And there's more grass growing in the blast zone, and that's what they're after. So there's more elk in the blast zone in the forest around the blast zone. And then something's going on with the population. They're having more triplets and twins. And so what is going on there? So the elk understand that their habitat has been decimated, and they're out there to repopulate the territory. And so that's an interesting story. That day on May 18th, 1980, the volcano released the energy equivalent of 440 million tons of TNT blast energy, equivalent to 33,000 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs. And that was just a small volcano, moderate volcano from human experience. And those of us who were there, when we watched it and the volcanic eruptions, we were powerless to change the course of events. The humanist, the person who believes that he's the master of everything and control of the things around him, the humanist is humble because there is power not under man's control. Somebody else is in control. Who is in control? God is in control. Do you know there's a verse about God being in control of volcanoes? Psalm 104, verse 32. He looks on the earth and it trembles. He touches the mountains and they smoke. Psalm 104, verse 32. He touches the mountains and they smoke. 400 million tons of TNT blast energy in the little finger of God. That's what that says to me. Come, behold the works of the Lord, what desolations he has made in the earth. He touches the mountains and they smoke. Mount St. Helens, a small volcano. And the humanist is humble because there is power and under man's control. God is in control, that's obvious. We're not. And as I think about the volcano, I think about my normal everyday way of thinking. If you would have come to me before the volcano exploded and said, the volcano is going to cause pyroclastic flows and other granular flows to make thin layers rapidly, I thought, well, that's outside of our normal experience and probably not. If you would have come to me before the volcano exploded and said, the volcano is going to cause mud flows and other energetic processes to cut solid rock and gouge out miniature Grand Canyon 1/40 scale, I might have got into a controversy with you. And if you would have come to me before the eruption and said, the volcano is going to cause logs to float on Spirit Lake, fall to the bottom, replant themselves with the root ends at different strata layer levels in the lake, I might have thought you were visionary, because those kind of things cannot be conceived of in our rational, normal thought. About the only thing I might have agreed with you before the eruption was what? Logs and plant material peat could be deposited underneath floating log mats. I was starting to think that way. So I had a PhD in sedimentary geology, and these things shouldn't escape my attention. What did I learn? God specializes in doing things that I think are impossible. Okay? God specializes in doing things that I think are impossible. How about you? Do you have something in your life you can't figure out how God could possibly do it in these kind of natural experiments? We discover these kind of things, and that challenges our comfortable view of the world. As I think about the power of God at the volcano and my abysmal way of thinking about natural process, I think about the Lord Jesus Christ. He humbled himself and became obedient unto death. He came and served me at my point of need. I see something of the meekness of God at the volcano. And that I'm just seeing a small volcano, I'm not seeing these really big volcanoes. And so I believe that the eruption of Mount St. Helens is the geologic event of the 20th century. And now that we look back on it, it is the learning experience geologically of the 20th century. And it's a miniature laboratory for the study of catastrophe theory, almost a Disneyland for somebody like me, a geologist. Okay, love to entertain your questions and thoughts. Remember Harry Truman? He died at the volcano. The volcano, that's kind of stands for 20th century man.
He lost many others, right?
Yeah, 57 people died at Mount St. Helens. Harry Truman, everybody was warned. It was in the red zone. The people that died outside the red zone even were warned. And so, yeah, there was advice not to be there. Yeah, and the government tried to evacuate or people before the eruption.
See, that 3 foot of peat, how long was the log mat there before you measured that 3 foot of?
5 years. How long was the log mat there when I saw the 3 feet of peat? Yeah, 5 years. The 5th year after the eruption, I dove the 4th year, but the 5th year is when I was studying that one you saw. Other questions? Yes.
You mentioned a 5.1 quake.
Magnitude 5.1, yeah.
Right. And was there like a depth of where that was measured? How deep it might have been?
Okay, yeah. It's in the surface. Okay, very shallow earthquake. And the question is, did the earthquake cause the landslide, or did the landslide cause the earthquake? Nobody's really resolved that one. Okay. Brittle failure of rock and the rupture of the magma chamber creating the landslide and then the earthquake. That all happened simultaneously. That's chicken and egg, which came first. Okay. Good question.